Egypt is splitting the Sahara Desert to bring the Mediterranean Sea back. It could redraw the map forever. The Sahara Depression lies deep in western Egypt, a sun-scorched pit in the Sahara, plunging 426 feet below sea level, where daytime heat can hit 122 degrees Fahrenheit and rain is virtually unheard of. It's one of the harshest places on Earth, a wasteland of salt and sand that seems destined to stay empty forever. But Egypt has other plans. The country now intends to flood this vast basin with seawater, turning the lifeless desert into a new inland sea spanning 5,400 square miles, nearly the size of Lake Ontario. It sounds almost unbelievable, an ocean in the middle of the Sahara? Yet behind the audacity lies a serious mission, to confront some of Egypt's biggest challenges head-on. This project could generate massive amounts of clean energy, power desalination for fresh water, and even reshape the local climate. If it succeeds, the Sahara Sea won't just change Egypt's map. It could redefine its future. Let's uncover how Egypt plans to turn the Sahara Desert into a living sea, and what it could mean for the world. Historical concepts of a desert sea. When Europeans first traced the empty contour lines of the Sahara Depression in the 19th century, they didn't see a useless waste of salt and sand. They saw an unfilled basin. The idea arrived almost immediately. Open a path from the Mediterranean, let the sea pour in, and you'd conjure an inland sea in the Sahara. The promise sounded irresistible for its time. More humidity, more rain, new croplands where dunes now ruled. It was part science, part wishful alchemy. Change the water, change the weather, change the map. Then came the arithmetic. A surface canal across a shifting desert wasn't just hard, it was astronomical in cost. Even the richest empires balked at moving that much earth across a hostile landscape for an experiment no one could fully guarantee. After World War II, optimism returned with a vengeance. This was the era that believed engineering could reverse rivers and raise mountains if needed. In the 1950s and 60s, Egyptian planners and foreign consultants dusted off the Sahara concept and drew bold new canal lines. But the desert pushed back. The approaches to Sahara were littered with WW2 ordnance from the battles of El Alamein, hundreds of thousands of unexploded mines lurking just beneath the dunes. Even surveying was perilous. Add the region's brutal 122-degree F heat, loose soils, and abrasive winds, and the project once again slipped from improbable to nearly impossible. Then the mid-1970s delivered the wildest chapter yet. If you can't dig, some argue, detonate. A proposal emerged to use 213 nuclear charges, each on the order of megaton-class yields, to blast a trench from the coast to the basin almost overnight. On paper, it looked efficient, cheaper, and faster than excavators, with the sea allegedly carving the rest of the channel itself. In renderings, new cities bloomed around a sapphire lake within weeks. Reality intervened. Military and environmental experts warned that detonations near the Mediterranean could seed radioactive fallout across Egypt, Israel, Libya, and even southern Europe. Geologists added that shockwaves through salt, chalk, and sand could collapse any newborn channel back into slurry. The nuclear shortcut died as quickly as it had been drawn. Yet the idea of a Sahara Sea refused to vanish. What changed wasn't the dream, but the toolkit. As tunnel-boring machines matured and Egypt gained deep experience under Cairo and the Suez, the strategy shifted from conquering the desert surface to going beneath it. The historical arc reads like a series of drafts: 19th century romance, post-war bravado, nuclear hubris, all culminating in a modern, quieter logic. If Sahara is ever filled, it won't be by rewriting the laws of nature. It will be by working with them, one precisely lined meter of tunnel at a time. The modern feasible plan, a tunnel. After a century of wild sketches and abandoned schemes, the newest plan drops the theatrics and keeps the physics. No nuclear blasts, no Grand Canal snaking across dunes, just a tunnel that does exactly what the desert won't let a surface channel do: move seawater quietly, safely, and continuously beneath the sand. First, the canal idea had to go. The Sahara doesn't forgive open cuts. Wind pushes dunes like slow rivers. What you dig today is buried tomorrow. Sandstorms abrade concrete, the sun supercharges evaporation, and, critically, vast stretches around the approaches are still contaminated by World War II mines. Clearing a corridor dozens of miles long would be like playing minesweeper with excavators. Even if you solved that, you'd still be fighting heat, wind, and water loss every single day. The desert would win. So engineers flipped the problem. Go under. A deep-bored tunnel runs below the hostile surface, where there's no wind, no sun, and no minefields. Down there, the Mediterranean's water is shielded from evaporation and sand drift. Only the inlet and outlet zones need careful remediation. The rest is geology and machine. This is where the 21st century earns its name. Tunnel boring machines, cylindrical factories the length of a city block, can chew through salt, chalk, and sand while installing concrete segment linings as they advance. They keep the face pressurized, steer by millimeters, and leave behind a finished tube strong enough to last generations. And Egypt isn't starting from zero. The country has driven TBMs under Cairo for the metro and under the Suez Canal for road and rail links. Projects that proved crews can manage groundwater, variable strata, and tight tolerances in desert geology. In other words, the tools exist and the skills are already local. With the tunnel in place, the hydraulics are simple and elegant. The Sahara Depression sits 426 feet below sea level. That elevation difference is a ready-made gravity head. Open the gates at the Mediterranean end and water flows downhill. No pumps, no diesel, no grid draw. Routes that flow through turbines, and you've got firm, carbon-free power on day one. As the basin fills, operators can modulate inflow with valves and spillways, keeping the system stable and predictable rather than a flood risk. The target operating level is about 197 feet below sea level, high enough to create a vast inland body of water, low enough to keep ample head for generation and control. At that set point, Sahara becomes a steady-state system. The tunnel supplies inflow, the basin and atmosphere handle evaporation, and the turbines turn that physics into electricity. Layer on an upper reservoir for pumped storage, and the project graduates from power plant to grid-scale battery, soaking up midday solar and returning it after dark. No fireworks, no fantasies, just a buried artery, a controllable valve, and gravity doing what it has always done, this time for Egypt. 3. The tremendous advantages of the Sahara Sea. A new era of energy. The Sahara scheme turns geography into a power plant. With the depression sitting 426 feet below sea level, a head greater than 2 Niagara Falls, Mediterranean water would descend through intake tunnels and drive hydro turbines before entering the basin. Unlike river-fed dams, this isn't hostage to seasonal flow. Desert evaporation continually lowers the basin's surface, pulling in new water and sustaining a gravity system with constant inflow. On conservative estimates, installed capacity lands between 600 and 1,200 megawatts, yielding 4 to 7 billion kilowatt-hours annually, firm, dispatchable generation that complements Egypt's growing solar and wind portfolios. The sea also functions as a giant natural battery. By adding an upper reservoir and reversible pump turbines, excess daytime solar can be lifted uphill. At night, stored water returns through turbines to stabilize the grid, shaving peaks, filling valleys, and improving frequency control. This pumped storage layer is especially valuable in hot seasons when air conditioning loads surge after sunset. Fresh water and environmental change. Electricity is only the first dividend. Hydropower from the Katara inflow can drive large-scale desalination, converting seawater into potable supply for cities and irrigation. At full utilization, engineers project up to 396 billion gallons per year, not a replacement for the Nile, but a decisive supplement that can green new agricultural belts and backstop drought years. The presence of a broad, relatively cool water surface moderates microclimates, humidity rises, heat extremes ease, dust storms weaken, and diurnal temperature swings narrow. Around the shore, planned shelter belts and drip-irrigated plantations concede green corridors and new oases, anchoring settlements against the desert wind. Economic and social benefits. A stable shoreline of more than 124 miles is an instant economic catalyst. Master planning anticipates tourism zones, public beaches, and marinas interspersed with conservation stretches, diversifying Egypt's visitor economy beyond the Red Sea and antiquities circuits. Aquaculture in brackish conditions can be tailored to salt-tolerant species, creating jobs, protein supply, and export revenue while using treated return flows to irrigate halophyte crops. Crucially, the Katara Rim provides new urban and industrial land. Utilities and logistics can be co-located with energy and water plants, lowering service costs per capita and easing demographic pressure on the Nile Valley. In effect, Katara enables a managed westward population shift, with housing, schools, clinics, and agro-processing sited near reliable power and water instead of along a congested river corridor. There is also a coastal systems dividend. By routing part of Mediterranean inflow inland, the project can marginally reduce hydraulic pressure on the Nile Delta, assisting long-term strategies against sea level rise and saline intrusion. While not a sole solution, it complements dike upgrades, wetland restoration, and smarter groundwater management. In sum, the Katara Sea is framed as multi-utility infrastructure: baseload renewable power, grid-scale storage, desalinated water, climate moderation, new coastlines, food security, and balanced urbanization, a single program delivering multiple national objectives with gravity as the prime mover. IV. The necessity. Egypt's struggle for security. Egypt's energy equation has become a national vulnerability. Roughly 9 out of 10 kilowatt-hours still come from gas-fired plants, a model strained by depleting domestic reserves and a demand curve that has jumped 50% in a decade. Each summer surge pushes the grid toward instability. Blackouts ripple through cities, factories idle, and irrigation pumps falter when they're needed most. Imports fill the gap, but they tether the economy to volatile fuel prices, maritime logistics, and geopolitics. In this context, the Katara Sea proposal is not a spectacle. It is a security instrument, a way to generate firm power independent of foreign tankers and global spot markets. By converting elevation into electricity and evaporation into a predictable inflow, Katara promises baseload renewable power plus grid-scale storage via pumped hydro. That two-layer system directly addresses Egypt's pain points. It cuts fuel exposure, stabilizes frequency after sunset, and supplies clean electricity for desalination, turning seawater into a strategic reserve of drinking and irrigation water. In other words, it attacks both sides of the scarcity loop, power and water, with gravity as the driver. Skeptics ask whether Egypt can execute at this scale in the desert. The recent record says yes. In the 1990s, the Shark El Wanena program drove hundreds of deep wells into the Nubian sandstone aquifer and brought more than 494,000 acres under cultivation. What was once cartographic emptiness became a mosaic of green circles visible from orbit, proof that the Sahara can feed people when power, pipes, and persistence align. Next came Tashka, the so-called Second Nile. Engineers lifted water from Lake Nasser and pushed it 155 miles into the desert through canals and pumping stations, aiming to revitalize 1 million acres and seed an entirely new province. Beyond agriculture, Toshka demonstrated something subtler but crucial for Katara: the state's capacity to finance, phase, and operate mega-projects in extreme heat, sand, and distance, while building the supporting roads, grids, housing, schools, and logistics that make communities durable. Building on that momentum, the New Valley project takes a more industrial posture. Not just fields, but agro-industrial complexes, grain storage hubs, and solar power stations designed to lock value chains in place, grow, process, store, and ship from the desert rather than hauling everything back to the Nile corridor. It is a template for how Katara's Rim could develop. Power and water anchors first, then manufacturing, then services. In sum, the Katara Sea is framed as infrastructure for sovereignty. It promises firm, fuel-free power to relieve the grid, desalinated water to buffer drought and demographics, and a new geography for settlement to ease pressure on the Nile Valley. Egypt has already shown it can rewrite the map with pumps, canals, and perseverance. Katara is the next chapter, a project designed not merely to impress, but to insulate the nation from the twin shocks of energy volatility and water scarcity. The catalyst. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD. On the Blue Nile, in the highlands of Ethiopia, a wall of concrete and steel has redrawn the region's hydrological map. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam sits on the river that supplies up to 85% of the water that ultimately reaches Egypt. Its reservoir, vast enough to rival Lake Nasser behind the Aswan High Dam, can hold nearly the same order of magnitude of water. For Ethiopia, GERD is a promise of lighted homes, humming factories, and electricity to export. For Egypt, it's a hand placed on the river's pulse. That is where the conflict sharpens. Ethiopia wants to fill the reservoir fast, on the order of 4 to 7 years, to ignite development and bring gigawatts online. Egypt argues for a much longer timetable, so downstream flows don't dip dangerously low. Here, single digits matter. A 10% reduction in Nile flow isn't a technical inconvenience. It's the difference between full canals and fields left dry, between steady tap water and cities rationing supplies. When your civilization is built around one river, any wobble in its rhythm feels like an existential threat. Diplomats have shuttled between capitals, technical committees have modeled scenarios, and statements have flown back and forth. But the core tension remains. Egypt seeks power and progress. Egypt needs water and stability. The Nile cannot be in two places at once. Every cubic meter held back upstream is a cubic meter that doesn't arrive at the delta. And climate uncertainty only tightens the vice. This is the backdrop against which the Katara Sea stops looking like a grand curiosity and starts looking like a strategic insurance policy. By tunneling the Mediterranean into the Katara Depression and letting gravity do the work, Egypt can carve out a clean energy base that isn't hostage to fuel markets or river politics. The plan's hydropower, augmented by pumped storage, does more than feed the grid. It powers the machines that make fresh water. Desalination, once an energy-hungry luxury, becomes a national tool. Run the turbines, run the plants, and turn seawater into security. No, Katara won't replace the Nile. Nothing can. But it can blunt the shock of tight years, stabilize electricity when air conditioners roar after sunset, and add dependable potable water when reservoirs downstream feel the pinch. In combination with conservation, smarter irrigation, and diversified renewables, Katara becomes part of a redundant, resilient system, one that buys time, options, and negotiating space. Seen this way, GERD is not only a challenge, it is the catalyst for Egypt's next chapter of infrastructure. If Ethiopia is harnessing elevation for electricity, Egypt proposes to harness its own geography, a basin 426 feet below sea level, to secure power and water on different terms. The river will always matter most, but in a century of hard choices, a sea in the desert may be the backup plan that keeps the taps running and the lights on, no matter what the upstream gauges say.
Conclusion: a sea to secure the future. What once sounded like science fiction, splitting the Sahara to let the Mediterranean Sea in, is turning into reality. This isn't a spectacle, it's survival. A desert once written off as lifeless could soon power cities, make fresh water, and even reshape the climate. Gravity becomes the engine, the sun becomes the accelerator, and the sea, Egypt's oldest neighbor, becomes its lifeline. This is more than engineering, it's reinvention. Because Egypt isn't just filling a basin, it's filling the future with light, water, and life in the heart of the Sahara. So, what part of this vision amazes you most? The idea of a sea in the desert? The gravity-driven energy? Or the promise of life returning to the sands?
And if the Sahara Sea inspired you as much as it did us, hit like, share this story with a fellow dreamer, and subscribe for more projects rewriting the limits of what nations can build.